teenagers are hard. You don't want to start with, you need to stop, which is, of course, where we all want to go. It really has to start with, hey, I'm concerned. I love you. This is what I've observed. And then tell me about this behavior. 4 weeks is on average the amount of time it takes to reset reward pathways. And after the end of that 4 weeks, tell me what you think. Do you still think that pot is like the answer to all your problems? Great thing about young people is their brains are so plastic, they can completely rewire their brains. Like there's so much hope there.
Welcome back to Evolve. Today, we have the privilege of speaking with Dr. Anna Lembke, who is a professor of psychiatry at Stanford University, chief at the Stanford Addiction Clinic, and the New York Times bestselling author of Dopamine Nation. Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us today.
Oh, I'm delighted. Thank you for inviting me.
Very grateful for your time. And today is a very important topic because we want to really dive into how we can help younger people to survive in an increasingly dopamine-fueled nation. Because I'm sure many people by now have obviously read the books, have probably seen other conversations breaking down the science of everything. But now I feel like there's such an intensity for the younger generation when it comes to social media, drugs, energy drinks, pornography. The list goes on and on, that even if I mean, as a 31-year-old, when I look at my teenage family members and cousins, it's really difficult to get through to them. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, please, just as open as you can, could you go into, I guess, an overview of what we can do and maybe set the scene for the younger generation growing up in, I would like to say, an increasingly dopamine-fueled nation 4 years on from when the book was published?
Yeah, I love it. This is a great topic, a really important topic. I'd like to start by saying that I think, although you and I and many of us are very concerned about the younger generations, and for good reason. There's plenty of evidence showing that this younger generation experiences more depression, more self-harm, more actual suicides in some countries, more anxiety than prior generations, and also spending many of their waking hours online, consuming all forms of digital media, as well as using other drugs. So there's lots to be concerned about. But on the other hand, we must remain hopeful and optimistic. And I really do think that it is Gen Z that was sort of weaned on the technology that will also be the generation to show us how to live in better balance, because they are the ones who are already, many of them, beginning to experiment with saying, hey, wait a minute. I don't want this life, right? I want something different. I don't want to spend all of my waking hours, glued to a screen or smoking pot or looking at pornography or what have you. And so I am seeing a lot of, although you had mentioned earlier that you feel like it's hard to talk to this younger generation. I agree, but at the same time, I think they are interested in figuring out how to feel better. And so where to start really begins with conversation. We really need to begin to have open conversations with the younger generation about what they are doing, how it makes them feel in the short term, how it makes them feel in the long term, and what else they could be doing in order to meet their various needs. There's so much fear that if we open up conversations about pornography or about drug use or about excessive video game use or excessive social media use, that somehow it's just going to get worse and worse, or we're going to find out things we don't want to know. We'll probably find out things we don't want to know. Really, really important to just begin with kind of a natural curiosity, like what's going on? Where do you spend your time? How is that for you? So these sort of broad, open-ended questions, just sort of like, what are you doing and how is that working out for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing is, it sounds simple to just ask those questions, but I do feel that like there is a difference in the way that, someone from my generation even just communicates. And I'm wondering, like, since I don't know if it's the post-pandemic generation or attention spans decreasing because of short form and social media, but I've noticed a kind of increase in a lot of pessimism with some of the younger people I speak to nowadays, that they just don't really have any goals or ambition. And is that linked to all of this dopamine as well? Where does this all arise from? Is it purely, from your perspective, from social media, or is it from mainly pornography, or what's the, I guess, root causes of all of this?
Yeah, so let me tell you about a patient of mine who's emblematic of lots of the young people I see, and he's given me permission to share his story anonymously. So this is a young man who, before he went off to college, was very excited about computers and computer science. He was going to go to college and be a computer science major. He also enjoyed playing video games. He played by himself. He played with a very good friend group. But he did other things too. He was on sports activities. He went on vacations with his family. He did other things. He went off to college, felt understandably anxious about meeting new people, a new environment. And so, as a sort of comfort in the evenings, he would play video games with his high school friends. As time went on, he played more and more video games. His friends would log off. He continued playing through the night with strangers, eventually got to a point where he was playing all night long, not going to class in the day, sleeping. And after about 2 or 3 months, he got very depressed, very suicidal. By the way, he hated all his classes. He thought, I'm not even interested in computer science. I'm not interested in doing it. Why am I here? And he basically thought, I'm just going to end my life. Fortunately, some astute, RAs or resident fellows on the floor realized that he was not well. Called the parents. The parents came and brought him home, and he came to see me. So the intervention there was kind of our standard intervention, which is to say, in very severe cases of video game addiction, because that's what he had essentially developed, which often leads to depression and in some cases suicidal thinking. And he basically was abjectly suicidal by the time he came to see me. He said he called himself a sunk cost fallacy. He said, and it's an economic term for like, I'm an investment that's not worth anybody putting anything else into. I'm just kind of a nihilistic, death wish. And I said to him, I think you're depressed. That's your depression talking. And I think you're depressed because you're addicted to video games. So in order to intervene, we're going to go way upstream. And I suggest that you abstain from all screens, like no screens at all, for 4 weeks. Why 4 weeks? Because 4 weeks is the average time it takes to kind of reset reward pathways, get the brain to start to upregulate feel-good neurotransmitters like dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, and get people to come out of this vortex of depression, anxiety, irritability, and craving. And to make a very long story short, he agreed to do that, although he was skeptical that it would make a difference with his mood. After 4 weeks of not touching a screen at all, so a very extreme kind of abstinence trial, which is not what we recommend for everybody, but in this case, he was really not well. He had huge improvements in his mood. Huge. We didn't prescribe a single antidepressant, no anxiolytics. We just took away the screens. And in doing that, we basically got his brain to reset. And he felt so much less depressed. He felt hopeful. He said, I'm feeling more like my old self. In fact, he felt so good that he didn't even want to get his phone and his screens back again. Kept going for longer, felt good. He was dropped out of school at this point. He was not with his peers. Eventually, after about 6 months, he was well enough. He reintegrated a smartphone. He reintegrated a laptop, but he got 2 separate laptops, one for gaming, one for schoolwork. So we did all kinds of work on how to create an environment that would help him stay healthy. If he was going to play video games just 2 hours a day, just with friends, never with strangers, never that game, only this game. So a lot of working on that plan collaboratively, right? He came up with the plan and he was motivated to do it because he felt so much better. And then here's sort of my long-winded way of answering your question. When he finally went back to school and he went back to taking his computer science classes, he was like, this is so interesting. Like, I'm really interested in computer science and these classes are really engaging. And my point being that when your brain has been hijacked by these frictionless, potent rewards, nothing else is interesting, right? We've lost our ability to both pay attention or find interest or pleasure, what we often call salience, in other things. But once we abstain from our drug of choice, whatever it is, for long enough for the reward pathways to reset themselves, all of a sudden, those things that were no longer interesting to us become interesting again. So when you talk about how can we talk to this generation, you can't really, it's hard to reason with somebody when you're bombarding their reward pathway with these high potency dopamine hits, right? But if you can get them out of that vortex for long enough for them to get their like frontal lobe back online and to reset their joy set point, their hedonic set point, then they feel better. They're motivated to make the changes, and then you can re-engage them in these discussions.
Yeah, I mean, it hits home hearing the stuff about video games because I had my phases when I was younger where teenage years, you would be staying up late. And
Yeah.
the type of content you're consuming, I mean, for some of the nerds out there, they would know there was a game called Gears of War, which is, when I look back, I mean, you're chainsawing people and, it's extremely violent stuff. And
Yeah.
then wondering why when I wake up with a lack of sleep, that I'm going around feeling negative all the time. And I did eventually notice that in my own personal life, huge difference after I just stopped playing those games.
Right.
But what you said also reminded me of a previous conversation that you had where you mentioned about like hitting rock bottom sometimes is that a kind of wake up call for a lot of people. And in this case, it's a really positive case where the person themselves actually is working on that strategy. But I find it with even people close to me when you suggest, okay, maybe take a break from smoking pot or weed, or maybe take a break from whatever it is, energy drinks or whatever the addiction is, TikTok. Uh, there's a lot of resistance. And so what advice could you give someone in your profession? Do you ever meet or encounter patients who are just so resistant to the idea of, no, I don't need to. It's fine. I have to do this or whatever. How can I speak to my younger cousins in that sense? Because that's the biggest challenge for me at the moment is getting. Mm,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, first of all, teenagers are hard, right? Because they think they know everything and that we know nothing and they've got it all. Even if they don't feel they have it under control, they don't feel like we're a source of wisdom for them. But we can still help them, and we need to get in there and try to help them, even if they don't want our help. And the place to start is a place of curiosity. Okay, so engage them in conversation at a time when we're calm, when they're relatively calm, not when we're dysregulated or screaming at them or telling them to
mm,
stop or get off the computer. But when things are calm, you might even schedule it say, I want to sit down and talk with you about something important, very serious. Tell me a good time that might work for you. So they're calm, you're calm, you've got time. Nobody's in a rush. Everything's a rush these days. These conversations cannot be rushed. And you sit down with your child or your nephew or your niece or whoever it is, grandchild for that matter, and you start by saying, like, I love you and I'm concerned about you. And you try to reflect back to them what you observe. You don't try to give them advice, and you have to be genuine, but you just say, this is what I'm observing. And I wanted to express that, like, I see you on your computer a lot and not engaged in what the rest of the family is doing. And when you're not on your computer, you seem irritable and anxious and you're yelling at people, you're not participating in family life or contributing chores, whatever it is. And just sort of open it up and say, what do you think about that? And try to open that dialogue. And then genuinely be curious, like what is it about your phone that is so entrancing for you? Like, I mean, it's intrinsically addictive, so I get, that it's reinforcing, but what does it do specifically for you? Like, what are the things that you like about it? Because everybody's got their own little story, for what they watch and why they watch it, or if they're using drugs, what they use. And then only after you have expressed, number one, what you observe, number two, really try to plumb the depths of why they're doing it. Then you go and you say, is it working for you? I mean, do you think that is this where you want to be with your life? Is it, are you getting what you want, or are there any problems you've noticed with this? And it's important to do it in that order. You don't want to start with, you need to stop, which is, of course, where we all want to go. It really has to start with, hey, I'm concerned. I love you. This is what I've observed. And then tell me about this behavior, because I'm curious, like, what's motivating you? And then bring them, after you've created that alliance, hopefully, to like, okay, that's why you do it. Is it working? Like, does it exist? Can you? And, if they say, yeah, it's working for me, it's working great, you kind of have to leave it alone, right? Unless, it's a younger child and you can actually, intervene against their will. And you should, frankly, if it's a younger child. But if it's
Could you clarify? Sorry to interrupt. Younger. What exactly? What's the age frame of younger in this sense?
well,
Sorry to interrupt.
like different cultures, different countries, different. But I can tell you in the U.S., it's basically the transition point is pretty much about age 13. So
Okay.
parents, I think, have quite a lot of control over what their kids do, where they are, where they spend time until about age 13. And in my opinion, based on my professional experience and my knowledge of this problem, kids under the age of 13 should not be given their own personal devices that access the internet. And all internet access should be supervised, right? We should be giving kids their own phones. They shouldn't have their own smartphones. They shouldn't have smart watches, in my opinion. If you want to be able to communicate with them, get a dumb phone. And for many families, that may even go up to age 16 or so, but certainly under the age of 13. Now, once kids get to be 13, even if we as parents don't give them access, they will often get their own phones, or they'll get a friend's phone, or, they can, by that age, we don't know what they're doing. And no parental control is going to be able to manage that. That's one thing to face up to also. Like, the parental controls don't really work. So then it needs to be, you can have your rules and your guidelines in your home, but you also really need to have open conversations, because 11-year-old boys, whether we like it or not, are watching lots and lots of online pornography. 11-year-old girls, whether we like it or not, are on social media. Both genders are playing video games. Do you know what I mean? So, not to say that girls aren't on pornography, they are. And not to say that boys aren't on social media, they are. But when we look at the genders, this is kind of the stratification that we see. And we have to also admit to ourselves, we have limited control and we don't know what they're doing. And I can't emphasize this enough, because I see parents bringing in older teenagers who they are shocked to learn at age 16, 17, whatever it is, that their child has been doing a certain behavior online since they were 11, 12, 13, right? So, and they're not bad parents, right? This is the struggle we're all having now. It's completely unfettered, unregulated, and the content is pushed to these kids. They are targeted to receive this content. Make no mistake. So if they have a device, you can assume they have access to this content. So you have to have the conversations. You have to assume almost they're watching it, and you have to open up the conversations.
No, I think it's such an important point, because I mean, even taking it back from when I started secondary school, which was a boys' school, so I guess it's I don't know the American equivalent, but I was 11 years old. We were from primary school in the UK to secondary school, and I remember at an all-boys school, in one of the first few days, a boy had one of the old flip phones and was showing us all of these videos, and that was before it was as accessible as it is now.
Right.
Even that's 20 years ago, and still we were all fascinated and amazed. But the thing I found, I mean, I worked for a little bit in a secondary school, and because of my studies on the politics of gender and sexuality, I would speak to the young teenage boys sometimes about pornography and masturbation. And it's such a difficult thing for so many parents. One, because parents are from a different generation technologically as well. So pornography might have meant going to a specific DVD store back in the day. But now, if they don't necessarily understand how accessible it is, there's that. And then two, culturally, depending on the background, I mean, even in my own family, I've got half of my family are English, so I guess they're a bit more open to talk about that. And I remember my grandma telling me, how things worked when I was a lot younger. But then on the like Pakistani side, like you wouldn't ever dream of talking about pornography. And I know a lot of other cultures across the world, across the US and the UK, you just can't mention that word. It's just, if someone's holding hands on the screen on a TV show, you change the channel. So how are you going to mention the P
Yeah.
word, right? So what advice, I guess, I guess it's really hard when there's these cultures that make it such a taboo. So what, for someone watching this who maybe is part of a culture there, they just can't even dream to mention that. Well, how could you advise them in that situation of like, okay, how do you even go about speaking to an 11-year-old kid about such, because it is, the research shows, right, it's getting more and more graphic and more intense. Everything, not just porn, but everything is more sensationalized. So what would you say to that?
You know, I totally get that culturally there are huge differences here, and that even mentioning pornography, for people from some cultures not only would be terrifying, but would also, in their minds potentially encourage, oh, I never thought about pornography. Well, that's cool. Maybe I'll go check out some pornography. Right. I mean, but here's the real deal. Kids are going to see it. They are going to be exposed to it. And there's so much fear around it. And we as parents come to it with a lot of fear. And, even as much as I, have knowledge in this area, it's not comfortable for me to talk about pornography with my, young adult and teenage son. It's not. I mean, it's awkward. But still, I know that we need to talk about it. And the key here, and again, I don't always accomplish this very well, but the key is we can't come in with our anxiety and our fear being like at the bleeding edge of this problem. Somehow we need to figure out how to manage that and just very calmly and hopefully wisely just talk about, hey, we should have a discussion about on online pornography, because the data show that, a lot of kids, a lot of people, including, younger generations are looking at it. And then you could even open up the door to, and you might also already be looking at it, but I'd like to talk about why that's not consistent with our family values, right? So you could, kind of embed it into sort of like, well, what are our family values? And again, not in a way that's like fear driven and like, and you should never do that, but just like, here are some reasons why. And of course, parents probably have to themselves sort of get together and say, well, why do we not want our child on pornography, right? I mean, and so, educating themselves too about the fact that pornography is addictive, right? Pornography kind of takes this sexual reward, which we're all geared to want because that's part of evolution and reproduction, and it kind of distills it down to its most reinforcing components, turning it into a drug, which means that it's addictive, which means that even if we start out with kind of bland pornography, over time, we'll need more of it and more potent forms to get the same effect. So more graphic videos, shorter videos. And that eventually what happens is that people need to be doing even escalated beyond that, illegal or very deviant forms of pornography. I have folks who are not pedophiles. Okay. They're not at baseline attracted to children. But what happens is they get addicted to pornography, And over time, their need for more potent forms escalates, and then they find themselves looking at child pornography. They're not fundamentally people interested in child pornography, but that's where they end up. And then they get caught, and then they go to prison, right? So these are like very serious consequences, even separate from the fact that, pornography exploits people who are in the images. Now with AI, pretty soon there's not even going to be real people in these videos, right? It's just, and then it raises all kinds of questions. Well, if there aren't people being exploited, is it still wrong? And yes, it's still wrong, but we have to think through, well, why is that, or why is it still a point of concern? It's like, well, it gives a kind of, it takes something that, now here's where the values come in, but I personally believe that sex should be a sacred thing between, committed, loving partners. And pornography, in my opinion, sort of adulterates all of that, right? And takes it out of that realm, which also, in my experience, that interferes with our ability to actually enjoy sexual congress with our loving partner. Where now you have something that becomes an obstacle to intimacy in real life. Anyway, there's a lot here, but um, these are the conversations that we need to have with each other as a society and with our children, because they are watching pornography.
Yeah, it's this one's such a complex one because you've got the moral aspects
Right.
also side by side with the biological aspects in terms of the addiction and those things. So you've got both of those going on simultaneously. Because I remember from when I was asked to speak with the younger male students about this, I was getting questions from like 14 and 15-year-old guys that were just completely innocent in their questions, right? Saying things like, "Oh, I need to, hit and slap women every time I have sex," right? They're asking me genuine questions, right? "Oh yeah, I need to do this every time, right? I need to hit them and choke them. That's what I've seen." And then others saying, "Oh, when I'm watching these videos and masturbation, I always wake up feeling really tired afterwards."
Mhm.
Um, but these are just things that the conversations they wouldn't be able to discuss with anyone else. So there's like the moral side and how it affects society. But in terms of just, I'm wondering how many people, I guess, suffer in silence or don't even realize they're suffering. Because in the same way you mentioned for that other patient, it was video games. But there are probably, and I know from experiences speaking with close friends, because I would say I'm, I guess, in a minority where I just am very open to speak to friends about these things. That's how I got over these kind of things in the past, is speaking openly. But some other close male friends, when someone I've known for like my whole life, they're still so uncomfortable to talk
Right.
about it.
Right.
So yeah, I'm wondering from your viewpoint, how serious is this for people in terms of if it's left unaddressed and you haven't had that conversation for young people specifically, what I guess are the potential consequences?
Oh, I mean, the consequences are huge because there's so much shame often, in this behavior, and then repeatedly trying to stop on their own, not being able to, which then compounds the shame, which then compounds the isolation. And then it leads to this terrible spiral of kind of their whole identity gets wrapped up in the compulsive behaviors, feeling that they're less than, terrified that anybody would find out, even as the problem escalates, right? And they're spending more and more time, more and more money, potentially looking at more and more deviant forms of pornography. So I think, I mean, that's part of, that's why we need to open up the conversation. I mean, I've received so many, letters and emails from people all over the world who read Dopamine Nation and just had such a sense of relief that, like, the book is talking about things like pornography and sex addiction, right? And that they're not the only ones, and also that there's hope, right? That there's hope that if they stop for long enough, they can rewire their brains. They can find joy in other things. They can live a better life. Because what happens with addiction is you start to feel like there are only two options: either I keep using my drug or doing my behavior and feel miserable, or I stop and I feel miserable, because when people first stop, they feel more miserable. We have to remind people of is there is this middle way where once we stop for long enough, brain is plastic enough to achieve a new set point such that we can enjoy our lives again while not doing the behavior, not consuming the substance. And this also leads into the very important piece of all of this, which is it's not just about not doing this behavior. It's about not doing this behavior and doing more of these behaviors over here that are essentially healthy sources of dopamine. So we give up this but we also replace it with getting together with friends in real life, right? Talking honestly and openly as you do about our troubles and thereby developing real intimacy and that feels good. Getting out into nature, doing sports, all of these things that really we can't be on a screen or smoking or drinking or whatever when we're doing them, so that people can see, oh, this is a much better path. I'm actually much happier when I'm doing these things over here. And the great thing about young people is their brains are so plastic that with enough consistent behavior change, they can completely rewire their brains. Like there's so much hope there.
Yeah, that's a message I've heard you reiterate multiple times that I think is so important, that no matter what you're in, especially for young people, that I think when we can, even though these are really serious topics, if there can be an overall positive tone of how it I want to say easily, it's not easily in terms of the overcoming the addiction, but then after that, how quickly people can literally change their lives
Yeah.
in a short period of time. But the pornography one, I think we eventually will have to, we're going to move on, because I feel like if we don't, I could personally listen to you back and forth on this for hours. But there is a paradox there of just, as you said, people are so ashamed of it. Like, oh my God, if someone found that out. But the data just show it's such a profitable industry. And there's probably more likelihood that the people around you you're embarrassed of finding out,
Yeah.
probably consuming it as well. So it's, yeah, that's what makes it particularly challenging with that one. But I want to move on then maybe to how, I mean, Dopamine Nation, society, culture. There is a society nowadays. Young people are not only, but we're talking about they're very impressionable to music, which is glorifying all of these things. When I look at my younger family members, it's vaping, it's smoking weed. I don't know what the exact chemical is, but they call it lean. Have you come across that before?
Yeah.
Um, I've heard of young people even in the UK taking this. There's so many, sex. How, when it's so embedded in the culture as well, how have you managed to, I guess, still get through to people who are, no, but it's cool. This is what I mean. Look, girls like me when I do these things. Right now, I'm the guy. I'm smoking cigarettes. That makes me look like a gangster, or that kind of culture of wanting to be the rebel. Have you come across that?
Yeah, I mean, of course, when you're dealing with teenagers, like anything that you're not supposed to do, is the thing that you want to do. And that's frankly why, when I look at in through the whole lifespan of people we treat, the hardest patients are the younger patients because they don't see anything wrong with it. And then the second hardest patients are the much older patients because they want to change, but now they've lost the brain plasticity to be able to
Mhm.
think easily. So you've got those two ends of the spectrums. The folks in the middle are where we generally, get more traction. But with the young people, I mean, I think what the place to try to enter in is something that they want that they're not getting. And, again, this is like sort of, it takes a conversation and really being present and listening to what is their experience and trying to find out what is it about what they're doing now, whatever their variety of behaviors they do to navigate their young life, what is not working for them. And that is really, your way in because typically what's not working, it might be something as simple as like I smoke pot and now it's done. I need to smoke a lot more to get the same effect, what we call tolerance. It's like, okay, yeah. that's something that's kind of not working, right? Because it's expensive, because you're smoking a lot more, because now you got to smoke and vape, or maybe they're coughing, or maybe it smells, or they can't run as fast. I mean, who knows? I don't know what it is. Everybody's going to be different. But it's the kind of trying to tease apart what that is. And then I think importantly, that's where I think the neuroscience can have a lot of traction for young people, where we explain to them how it changes their hedonic set point. They can get in that vortex of addiction and craving, where now, even though it's causing problems, they still think it's working because right when they use, they feel better. And then asking them to do an experiment. And again, I always use the language of experiment because, we can talk till the cows come home about why they should stop using. It's not until they actually do it for long enough to feel better that they're convinced. So again, it's inviting them in to do an experiment. It's like, I know you think that this, smoking pot is the only thing that helps with your anxiety or the only thing that puts you to bed or whatever it is, but I ask you to do an experiment. Try not using for 4 weeks. 4 weeks is on average the amount of time it takes to reset reward pathways. And after the end of that 4 weeks, tell me what you think. Do you still think that pot is like the answer to all your problems? Or do you have a different perspective? Because typically they will come out with a very different view and be like, oh, wow, I thought it was helping, but I realize now it really wasn't. So they have to have that own lived experience, but we can motivate them to try that experiment by, again, genuinely being present and curious. So like in your case, when with your younger relatives, you probably have said to them a million times, you got vaping, you got to stop using. Maybe a different entry in is, hey, tell me about vaping. Like why do you like it? Like, what is it? What is it? What role does it play in your life? So you really try to get at what is the nature of the attachment. And I think in doing that, you'll discover it's not like they're not 100% on it, that there's an aspect of it that's problematic.
I mean, you're making me, I'm caught red-handed here because I guess, have that approach, and I've got to take self-accountability here, right? It's meant to be about the young people, but I remember you saying clearly as well that when we take our own responsibility of things, we can probably improve them. But actually, that trickling down, I haven't been empathetic at all with the approach. I've tried to be the kind of hard line, you know, don't do this. This is bad for you, whatever, without actually asking why they do it. So I think it's so obvious once you've said it. But I feel like we're the older brothers, we're the older cousins, we're the parents, we're looking down, listen to us. But it's the oldest story ever, isn't it? This kind of patronizing parents and whatnot. So no, I
Well, and I
really
don't
appreciate that.
give yourself a break. I don't think it's patronizing. I think it's worried. It's the worried parent. It's the worried uncle. It's like, you've lived long enough to know that this is probably not going to get them to a good place. And, you're worried for them. But that just doesn't, bringing that anxiety and that worry to a teenager, well, actually to any age of anybody, frankly, but especially our teenagers, that's like kryptonite for them. I mean, that just like run away. They will run away from that so fast. But if you can also if you could kind of model like maybe things that they will want later. So not so much like don't do this and don't do that, but hey, I'm doing this and it's really working well for me. Do you want to maybe try whatever it is? I don't know if you're meditating
Mm.
or if you're surfing or if you're doing basket weaving or playing the piano, like just other, healthier rewards, and see if you can entice them, to try that at the same time that you explore with them, hey, what's with the vaping? Like what, why?
No, I think it's a great point about leading by example. That in my own life, since I took out things, I mean, it's been nearly 3 years since I didn't drink alcohol. I know that when I tell the youngers don't drink, they're more likely to listen to me because I don't do it anymore. But then it's a strange one because when I tell them, oh, I've smoked weed before, I've drunk as well, they're more likely to listen because then I'm not as bad as I'm not judging them, but it's still something I'm wrestling with. But a key one you mentioned, I think I'm assuming in America, because in the UK, there are vape shops everywhere now. And I don't really know too much about it. I know that I don't particularly think it's a good thing. But could you break down a little bit? Let's say you find out that your teenager is vaping. What's the best way to deal with that? Because I don't know the science behind it, but Mountain Dew flavored whatever's coming out their mouth, can't be good. But what's your perspective on that?
Oh, it's definitely not good. So, and the vapes were approved to help people stop smoking cigarettes, and they probably do help people get off of cigarettes and get onto vape. But unfortunately, they've also become a doorway into nicotine addiction for young people. This is the terrible thing about this kind of, technology. Um, yeah, I mean, it's very bad for kids, because the odorless, smokeless vape means that they can do it all day long, right? Pretty much anywhere. So what we're seeing now is kids who are coming in with these astronomically high nicotine levels. And not surprisingly, they can't sleep, right?
Mm.
They're anxious and agitated. They're having panic attacks. And you measure their nicotine level and it's through the roof. So we went from a cigarette, which is definitely unhealthy, especially because of the tar and the risk of cancer, to now this delivery mechanism that can deliver so much more nicotine, that we have. I think we've just traded out our problems. And also, nicotine is frankly one of the hardest addictions to quit because of this very fast onset and fast offset. People are constantly in a state of withdrawal and constantly craving. And of course, it's that craving to bring, the levels back up again that ends up taking up so much of our time and attention. But it's very insidious because as soon as we smoke, we feel better. So it's like, oh, it's a learned behavior. I want to feel better. I'll smoke. So it's a tough one. Again, I think the key here is to, number one, just sit down and have a conversation,
Mm.
have an open conversation. And sometimes, to help facilitate these difficult conversations, there's a trick where you can take a spoon or other utensil and you have a rule and you say, okay, who's ever holding the spoon is the only person who gets to talk. Nobody else can talk until they have the spoon. And so what that does is that it makes people feel safe because they realize I can keep talking until I give away the spoon. And it also ensures that people who tend to talk a lot in a given family aren't then talking over other people. So especially with a teenager who's maybe reluctant to talk or may need a lot of time to be able to say what they want to say, it creates a safe infrastructure for them to be able to have these conversations. So that's another little tip that you might find, and often these conversations can be facilitated by a therapist, but many people don't have access to a therapist or don't want to go to a therapist. But again, you take a pen or a spoon, you say, okay, whoever has the spoon, you can say your piece. So, it could be the kid starts with, hey, this is why I vape. Vaping does this for me, it does that for me, give the and nobody interrupts. And that kid may in that space get an opportunity to really say what they think about vaping. And then the parent gets the spoon and says, okay, it's always good to validate what you heard, but then also say, well, here's what I see and what I'm concerned about. So you just open the conversation, with your older teenager.
Mm. Yeah, I think the theme that I've observed from all of this excellent advice is just basically giving people the space to express themselves. And I know with men especially, generalizing here, but we just in general are less likely to express ourselves, which is probably why we seek those releases of that. So, and as you're saying it, I know that I would be the person, if there wasn't a spoon, I would be speaking over them straight away to tell them, yeah, but you don't, whatever. So it's a really good, this feels like a great just self-reflection
Yeah, yeah,
exercise as well for me to put myself hypothetically in those
yeah,
conversations.
yeah. Good. I'm glad. Well, sometimes these practical tips or, little frameworks can just help facilitate the conversation. And the thing is, once you've given them a chance to speak, they're much more likely then to listen to what you have to say, especially if, again, nobody's dysregulated. Once we become emotionally dysregulated, nobody's really able to listen anymore. So I think these are kind of little things we can do to just open the conversation.
Got it. And yeah, Dr. Lemke, another thing as well is that, so it's been nearly 4 years since Dopamine Nation was published, right? Is that correct? I think it was
Yeah.
2021. So has anything, I guess, because technology is evolving so rapidly now, obviously, I mean, yeah. So in those 4 years, what have you observed that, I guess, if you could do a quick little update or message to someone in terms of what's happened in that short space of time? Have you observed anything that you're like, oh, by the way, now this is X, Y, Z?
Yeah, I mean, a lot. There's been a lot of movement in the past 4 to 5 years, some good and some bad. I would say on the good front, there's much more awareness about the addictive nature of digital media broadly, social media, pornography, video games, online shopping, you name it. People, I think, are more aware than ever before about the potential harms there, which is good. And one of the things that I'm very excited about is more and more schools are now opting to be cell phone or smartphone free. And that's so important because kids spend the vast majority of their time growing up in schools. It's where they socialize, it's where they learn, it's where they build the fundamental skills that they're going to need, for the rest of their adult lives. And of course, they learn those things at home as well. I mean, everybody is educated in their home also, but you can do all of the right things at home. And if your kid is going off to school and on a computer all day and watching pornography and vaping in the bathrooms, these are the types of things schools really have to get on board with helping create these safety nets or guardrails. And I'm beginning to see that happen, and that's very, very encouraging. On the concerning side is that the technology has only gotten more and more sophisticated in terms of offering us these frictionless dopamine rewards. And, the whole idea about social media, for example, is that it was going to be a way for us to connect with other humans. And now what it's looking like more and more is that it's moving toward really AI bots or avatars that aren't even humans that are now replacing the humans that we were kind of connecting with online, even if it wasn't good connections. But now people are like, they're turning to Chat GPT to ask how to, respond to an email or how to talk to a friend, or even more, they're just talking to Chat GPT. They're not making friends. Like the AI is so sophisticated that it feels like a human being. And, as I write about in Dopamine Nation, the fear all along here is that we will replace real life human connections with these drugs, digital drugs, other drugs. Like we no longer will actually be relating to each other in real life. And the technology is only moving us closer to that Armageddon, which is why it's really all the more important that we have conversations about it. We raise awareness. There's so many great things about the technology, but there is a very serious dark side, and we cannot ignore it.
It's a real double-edged sword here because technically, I mean, we have a platform. We put videos on social media, and I believe there's a lot of good in that as well. But I personally don't have I don't have a personal Instagram account because I just feel that when I'm in that space, the way my brain's wired, it just saps everything out. And I can get extremely depressed by just constantly trying to keep up with people and compete. But I didn't have access until Instagram until I was around 18 or 19. I don't know the average age, but I'm pretty sure it's way younger than that now.
Oh, yeah.
So
Absolutely.
the final area, I guess, would be Instagram, social media, these kind of networks where people are speaking to people, communicating. I mean, there's the danger side, of course, of just meeting and communicating with people who kids shouldn't be doing anyway, like people who aren't kids and masking as kids. But yeah, what's your final advice and take on parents dealing with that? I mean, it's that on its own, again, could go on for hours and hours. But in a nutshell, what do you think is the solution for Should parents regulate? I mean, every social interaction that they have on Instagram or something. I mean, what's your take?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, implied in your question is a very important distinction, which is that the developing youth brain is different from the adult brain. So I am not saying that, no one should ever go on social media ever. What I'm saying is that a kid's brain, in many instances, not all kids, not all teens, but in many instances, lacks the capacity to be able to use an addictive social media platform in a healthy way. That although there may be some positives there and some healthy connections, that the negatives ultimately outweigh the positives because of the addictive design features, the notifications, the infinite scroll, the shares, the likes, the comments, the numerification, the quantification, the way that the algorithm optimizes for whatever that person has watched before and then feeds them more content like that, ultimately pushing them into these kinds of addiction spirals where they can't stop even when they want to. Now, if you give me an adult and they can have their choice of, the landscape of the many addictive digital media products, but for kids, we as a society have a responsibility to create guardrails. We cannot leave it up to parents alone because, as I said before, it's an impossible task. At some point, your kid will get a phone unbeknownst to you and access the internet, and you have no way to know what they're doing or to stop it, right? So, what to say to parents? Again, I do not think that a child under the age of 16 should be on social media. There are more bad things than there are good things in the context of the developing brain. And then once they get to be an older teen, some kids will be able to handle it and others won't. And it will become apparent, which ones can't. So, and it's not immediately apparent, but eventually, kid is not thriving, kid is depressed, anxious. And the science, shows that at the population level, that quantity matters. And the more time kids spend on social media platforms, especially the, addictive social media platforms, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat, the more likely they are to suffer from depression, to suffer from anxiety, to suffer from suicidality, to even commit self-harm. So we can see that causal relationship going in the direction of social media and other digital media platforms causing these mental health harms. Likewise, we see when kids stop for long enough to reset reward pathways, their mental health improves. So there's enough out there, there's enough evidence, in my opinion, to be able to say we need to protect kids. And again, can't just leave it up to parents. It's got to come from the schools. It's got to even come from, lawmakers, right? How are we going to create guardrails? So, for example, I think that we absolutely need age verification. It should just be a given that if you're going to go on the internet, you need to verify that you are of a certain age. And it can't just be like whatever age you say you are, happening now. It has to be like an actual verifiable account. And only then can you get onto certain platforms because parents can do what they can do, but they can only do so much. And unless the actual internet and the metasphere, has those guardrails, you're going to have a lot of kids who are harmed. And that's on us as a society and on the company
Yeah,
that, making profit from these forms.
I mean, it's a testament to whether or not it's a good thing or bad thing, but the genius of those platforms too, as you said, just, I mean, even I am an adult, but I just can't do
Yeah.
Instagram because of how addictive it is and how it just on
Mhm.
all fronts, what you're messaging about on WhatsApp is then used in the advertisement data. So then they're just getting you left, right, and center. But you made me think about there, okay, so below 16 social media, but the genius of these apps and keeping your attention made me think about YouTube and these kind of shorts for kids. Because
Oh,
now an observation I've had is that in families, but not just in my own family, just out and about, you will see the iPad generation of kids, or, from short form content from a very, very young age. And I think I see families out when I'm traveling, just four members of the family, each one's on their phone, but there'll be a 3-year-old or a 2-year-old,
It's
and
terrible.
they're swiping through these. Yeah. Could you go into that, please?
Yeah, and in the short form video, that is a drug. That is a drug. And, and all of these social media platforms, they're all copying each other. They're all going to the phone-based format, short form video, because it's incredibly addictive, and so that increases watch time. Anyway, I actually realize I have to go. I wish I would stay longer, but it's been great talking to you. I know it's a depressing topic, but there's hope, and the simple fact that we're talking about it gives me a lot of hope. And like I say, a lot of Gen Zers are getting off social media. They are. And they're getting off their phones, and they're not drinking alcohol, and they're trying to stop smoking pot. So I think they're realizing that this is not a life.
Dr. Lemke, thank you so much for giving us this insight and into this topic. I know, we're super grateful for your time, and I feel like I could ask you questions for 10 hours more about this, but yeah, I'm sure that everyone watching is super grateful. Do you have any final messages or references or things you'd like to share with us before we close today?
Well, we came out with the official Dopamine Nation workbook, which is a step-by-step guide for how to do the abstinence trial, the dopamine fast, which, can be used by families, parents and kids together, teenagers on their own, teachers in classrooms. So it was really kind of developed with young people in mind. So that's a potential resource. It's called the official Dopamine Nation workbook.
Excellent. We'll make sure to put all of those links in the description box below. A huge thanks to Dr. Lemke, and of course to everyone watching this. Let us know what you think, please, in the comments. Maybe you have extra points or questions. We want to know everything. So we'd also appreciate if you could please click subscribe, as it helps us to make more content like this. But until next time, we're very grateful to everyone. Of course, thank you to Dr. Lemke, and we'll see you next time.